Yeah.
So where are we here? We are Christian and Christian, the Old-Fashioned Dad podcast.
Yes, welcome.
Welcome. And we are talking about fear and fatherhood today and getting into some Preservation Distillery Summer Rye. We are the Old-Fashioned Dad podcast, seeking to love dads through the person and work of Jesus Christ, entering into tough conversations on faith, God's calling, marriage, parenting, sex, all while enjoying good whiskey. I'm Christian Bringoff.
And I'm Christian Harris.
Thanks for joining us. Okay, so let's hop right into the whiskey. Thanks all for tuning in to this week's episode, Fatherhood and Fear, or Fear and Fatherhood. And the whiskey today that we are going to get right into is Preservation Distillery, based in Bardstown, Kentucky, Summer Rye. Christian, let's jump into it. And cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
Winky, virtual. There we go.
Oh, that's good. Oh, still can't touches the lips. Oh,
creamy. Do you feel like you are getting any, now that we've done 4 or 5 episodes, do you feel like you're getting any, more, I don't know, more distinct flavors while you're tasting this whiskey, or do you feel like it's still kind of roughly the same?
Roughly the same. Yeah. I wish I could say, oh yes, my palate is developing and I can taste all the nuances, but
all that really says to me is I need to pour more whiskey down your throat on a regular basis. That's what that says to me.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
So next week we'll try 5 different whiskeys. And you'll be tanked by the end of it. So, on.
Yeah. It'd be dangerous. Yeah, it's good. I mean, it I don't know. It tastes good. I like it.
So I actually kind of went above and beyond with this whiskey today. I had some spare time. I don't know how I found it amidst this pandemic, but we're day 4005 in the pandemic, and I decided to write a small little write-up on my website, christianbringoffphotography.com, on this particular whiskey. I wanted to go over legs and balance and body and sweet and char and tannic, a lot of different tasting notes and stuff like that I think would bore most people.
I don't know what most of those things mean.
Yeah, you're just like, it's whiskey. I don't know, just drink it. But I thought that I would write up on that, and it talks a little bit more about some of the stats for some of the whiskey nerds that are out there that might be listening. I think I've kind of turned into a whiskey nerd, if that is a thing, which I'm all right with as far as nerd things go.
Oh, there's a thing for every little idiosyncrasy out there. So
there's cigar nerds, there's whiskey nerd. You might be more of a cigar nerd, or at least moving that direction.
Sure.
You're like, okay, Christian, just shut up. Some of the notes that I got out of this, I always think it's very interesting when other people go over their notes, but here's some of the notes that I got out of this. Jelly beans, caramel, toffee, toasted corn, cotton candy, and ice cream cone. Yeah.
That is interesting. So you're basically at a carnival, an adult carnival.
Yeah, basically, we're at a circus. That's where we're at, drinking this whiskey. And this whiskey kind of comes in at $170.
Okay.
If you can find it for that.
And that's the 120 proof.
Yeah, it's almost 120 proof, coming in at 118.9. I don't know where they get the 10th of points in there, but is it feeling hot to you?
No, it's definitely strong, but it's not like burns or anything. Yeah, it's smooth for being that much alcohol.
Okay. This whiskey actually is really popular over in Japan. There's kind of a cult following for Very Olde St over in Japan. So back in the 80s and 90s, bourbon kind of tanked, and what kind of saved the bourbon and whiskey industry in America was the Japanese, basically. They just started buying up all this bourbon and whiskey. And so you see a lot of bourbon distilleries a lot of the really, really good stuff actually goes to Japan and not so much to America. But it's starting to come back to America because Americans are really wanting bourbons and whiskeys. It's kind of seeing a, I don't know, renaissance? Is that
Resurgence.
right? There we go. Resurgence. I knew it started with an R. So, okay. So we'll continue drinking this whiskey and maybe even pour some more of it through the course of the next, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. Any interesting dad stories for this week, Christian?
Do they have to relate to fear?
Nah,
No,
just
okay.
dad stories.
You know, last night was ugly. I was not exemplifying good fatherhood or godliness. It was I was at the end of the day and my son's melting down and I was escalating things and I have a long talk with my wife afterwards and I don't know, it wasn't fun.
Man,
but it wasn't even alcohol to blame it on. So.
Well, that's I suppose I mean if
I guess that's a good thing. Right?
That is, if there's a silver lining, that's a good thing. Otherwise, we'd have to like start talking about AA and
right.
No, I'm kidding. Did you get to work through it with
we
your wife and your son?
We worked through it. It was just I'm trying to see if it ties into fear. I mean, it was just kind of unmet expectations of like just tired of every time I ask my son to do something, there's a pushback or whatever, and so it just kind of got the best of me.
Do you think the quarantine got you yesterday?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I mean we're what a month into this essentially.
We're nearing 2 months.
Yeah, it's I don't even know. It just all blurs together, but yeah, because here in Washington, 25th was the official. March 25th was the official close down.
Oh, was it the official? Oh, okay.
I think school ended got shut down a week before that or something. But yeah, I mean it's interesting because I've kind of noticed like I actually do a lot better in the morning. Like I'm much more resilient and jovial, while my wife is a lot crankier and quick to yell at my son. Well, the evening I'm just done and I get upset and she tends to be a little more resilient. So I mean, at least we're not melting down at the same time, so that's good.
That is good. I you know what though, I like the kind of the realness, the human factor there, because like not every episode that we're going to end up talking is like we're going to have some sort of success or something like that. We're not going to, I mean, like,
sure,
like we're real dads that just we mess up, we shit the bed, right? And
yeah, we're average dads. Some may say I'm below average, but whatever.
I mean, I always think of you as a little bit below average, and I'm right there with you. But sometimes you get right at average, and it feels good to be right there with you.
That's a win to be an average, yes.
You're a C+ dad, yay!
You're saying I graduate. Woo!
Yeah, I was trying to think all week for this podcast, like what what would be a good like dad story to share. Like now my mind is kind of like tuned into like, hey, what can I share about being a dad? And so I had an opportunity last week to kind of or not last week, this week to play with my kids. And you know what? There was like some real missed moments there. I just didn't want to. Like, I'll just be honest. I just did not want to play with my kids. I felt like there was so many other things to do, and I was like so frustrated with like the second I told them to get off of screens, like they're asking me for stuff, and I know that they're like, yeah, that's what kids do, and parents are supposed to kind of like be there, and but I don't know. I didn't have any patience this week to attend to my kids' needs, or like, I mean, I could have sat down and played a game with them, or I think actually yesterday I finally came to my senses, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go ride scooters with my kids while they ride bikes, and I'm just gonna be kind of a big kid with them, and that was kind of successful. But there was also like last night, my oldest kid got hit with a sword, not a real sword, but I have to clarify that.
Hello, CPS. Yeah.
Got a toy sword. A friend of hers, they were playing, and she got hit with a toy sword. Sure. I mean, I'm sure that he came down on her arm real hard, but she kind of hams it up, in my opinion, and so like my instinct is to like, come on, you're exaggerating this,
Sure.
like you're blowing this way out of proportion.
Yeah, my kid does that
um,
too.
yeah, and I just like, I almost want to be like, I I hate saying it, but I'm like, man, I don't have any sympathy for you. You're just like trying to get attention at this point. And I'm just like, can you please like toughen up? You didn't lose any limbs. You're not bleeding. There's really no bruising. Why are you howling as much as you're howling? Like, come on. But my wife often has, a more loving approach in those particular instances. And so like, I don't know, I think I kind of fail in that regard. But at
So you
any
could
rate,
use it. You could use a little more empathy.
yeah, I, I don't want to use the, no, you know what? I am going to use the quarantine. I'm definitely going to use the quarantine. Like, it is wearing on me, bro.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's it's creating like a lack of like, I have, what's the phrase? Zero fucks to give.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, I'm not trying to be there, but I am kind of there.
Sure.
And I know that's going to impact my parenting, and it might, you know what, this might even be a nice like segue into like our collective stories into what our ultimate topic is today, of fear and fatherhood. So the previous week we touched on anxiety and fatherhood, and tried to do so from a pretty high up level, 30,000 foot level. And I think fear, and anxiety, sorry, not fear and anxiety, but fear and fatherhood, is honestly kind of continuing the topic from last week a little bit, but kind of being more specific. Um, so I came up with a couple of questions, and I thought I would just ask you, and we can just kind of talk back and forth over it for the remainder of the podcast here. But what do you think fathers fear?
What do they fear?
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I haven't had a chance to really look at these, so these are all going to be very off the cuff.
yeah. Please, and that's what I want.
Sure. What do they fear? I mean, I'd say at a visceral level, failure. And I think that could look different depending on the kind of upbringing you had and what you consider success. For me, what do fathers fear? I mean, I guess for me, on some level, it's having a kid that grow up that doesn't love God, or
Mm.
turns out to be a shitbag. you know? um, Maybe it's too honest. I don't know.
I mean, it's real. I mean, I think a lot of dads probably have those thoughts and feelings. They just probably would never say them on a podcast, but they have them.
Sure. Yeah. Luckily, my wife will never listen to this. So, um, I mean, I'd say in more of the day to day, it's more the like kind of the fear of missing out. It's because I'm a very pragmatic, very practical person, and so and like many guys, I'm probably my energy and time is very segmented. So I'm like, okay, this is my work time. I'm doing work things. Okay, now I need to shift to like dad stuff or wife stuff or husband stuff. And it's very hard for me to shift from like one mode to another. And so like if my son comes in here while I'm working, I've got no patience, like,
Mm, yeah.
uh, he won't catch me at my best. But so I mean, I'd say kind of missing those opportunities because my son's 9 now, and there's no grace in the sense of like he's not going to remember things. Like if I screw up
Mm,
now, he's going to remember those things. It's going to carry on into his counseling, into his teens and 20s. So it's a lot more real than maybe the first 4 or 5 years where you're kind of trying to figure it out. And there's a little grace in the sense of like, yeah, you're setting the patterns of parenting and expectations and worldview, but the problem I can like have actual memories of like, yeah, my dad was angry all the time or whatever. He didn't have time for me. But
mm,
those are the things that like kind of the anticipating having those regrets, like I try to do things to make sure I don't have those, of the I didn't spend time with them when I should have because I was working or too busy for them, or I was too, or like you said, kind of that, our kids ham it up, but like I want to lead with empathy, but there's still this like, okay, now you're just being dramatic to get attention. Like, where's that line? Because I don't want to be all
Yeah.
like, hey, just toughen up, rub some dirt on it. But I also don't want to play into their, manipulation. So
Right.
kind of get off
Yeah.
on
No.
tangent there. Yeah.
No, that wasn't. That was completely on point. And I like what you're having to say. I was, I was thinking about. There's a lot of things that fathers can fear, but I was trying to break them up into like different categories. I mean, like maybe some general things. Inadequacy, and there's a lot that can go under that. But
It's a general, just masculine thing, like being
yeah,
inadequate, adequate as a father, as a lover, as a father, as a worker. I mean, all sorts of stuff.
parent, yeah, financial provider,
Mm-hmm.
worker. I mean, Christian. I mean, like you can go. I I don't know that you could exhaust a list. I think it's almost limitless in some ways. I think fathers can fear kind of like this emotional instability in themselves if they, again, show emotion. I think that they're afraid that they're going to be seen as, and again, this could probably be a subpoint under inadequacy, but if they show emotion, it's going to be seen as inadequate. They're not a good relational, emotional, and maybe even financial provider or even protector. I think also this can also fall under inadequacy, but being just simply a bad leader, being a bad example. I don't know that all dads worry about that, but I think some of the dads that are present and have emotional awareness, I think this is probably something that they think about. There certainly are plenty of bad dads out there, and I don't, that are very content to just continuously living their lives the way that they're living and being bad dads. And they're not asking this question. They're not going, well, am I a bad dad? If they were, then maybe they would change the way that they're doing things. But
Sure, it's one thing to be a bad dad and not care or not know. It's another thing to be a bad dad and like trying to like lay your issues down at the cross and get better and whatever, work on stuff.
correct, yeah. So I mean, I think the inadequacy thing is a really big thing that drives a lot of dads' fears. Um, so and so along with what you said, along with what I said, how do fathers? Again, I like that you're kind of coming at this with more like you haven't viewed the question, so you're going to kind of come off the cuff with your answers. So how do fathers respond to these fears? Like, how do you see fathers responding to these fears? How do you respond to these fears?
Anxiety, fear, control.
More fear.
Yeah, more fear. Trying to control things. I mean, that's probably my default response is I can fix this, I can control this, I can manage my kids, my wife, their expectations, whatever it is, their behavior. I mean, that's probably the most obvious one. At least that's where I gravitate towards. I mean, when on better days, when I'm actually, relying on God, being dependent on Him, then that looks like prayer, empathy, grace, thoughtful discipline, not off the cuff anger discipline. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but like when I in my early 20s, early mid 20s, like this kind of stuff and fears of inadequacy, I think are what kind of drove me to, like, I don't know if you're familiar with John Eldridge and Ransom
Oh
Heart
yeah,
Ministry stuff, but
wild heart, wild at heart.
yeah, Wild at Heart. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I came across that book and it just wrecked me, because like um, it got into all these issues of masculinity and how we relate to God, and and I've got mixed thoughts on kind of the directions of that stuff. But one of the questions they ask, as far as like a masculine heart is, am I enough? Do I have what it takes? Like, and it kind of relates it back to like a little boy. Like these are the things that boys are living out in their adventures, in the woods, and we carry that through our masculinity into our adulthood, into fatherhood, into parenting, into marriage and stuff, into work. I mean, do I have what it takes? In a sense, we don't. That's why we need Jesus. But in another sense, there's something about like the power and rule God gives us to have enough, So anyway, a little divergent, but that kind of stuff, like Ransom Heart Ministries resources, are I don't know. I found them very helpful over the years.
Yeah. So you're saying that you respond to uh, like the different fears in your life, often with anxiety and more fears. I thought that was interesting. The more fears one. Like I thought that was I hadn't thought about that, but that one actually kind of makes sense, and I think I agree with that one a lot. Like responding to it sounds kind of weird, honestly, counterintuitive, but like responding to fear with more fear.
Sure. I mean, I in our household we often refer to it as like catastrophizing, or kind of that downward spiral of like, well, if this happens, then this is gonna happen, then this, and the world's gonna end. Oh my God,
Yep.
like that's not helpful. And like at different times, Jen and I can gravitate that direction, but we have to kind of remind each other of, like it's not on us. If it was, maybe that would be true, but God's here, and that's not how He wants to live our lives, and
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. So yeah.
I some of the stuff that I've seen. I mean, not just for myself, but for other fathers. But what I often see is anger. Is like there's a fear, and then what happens is anger. And anger seems to kind of be uh, the vehicle or the ship that really carries a lot of different actions for the father. Um, and I think that's honestly, I think that's why most men end up going towards anger, because that is like where they feel the most powerful, and that's where they feel the most in control. When they use their voice, to command respect, when they use their body posture to demand again respect and control. I think a lot of men, I think they know. I mean, I kind of feel like they might know deep down that anger is probably not the most healthy of responses, but it is where they feel the most comfortable. And I think that um, fear often it looks different for women, how women respond in fear, how mothers and wives respond in fear. But and not to say that they don't express anger, but I think mostly for a man, they respond a lot of times in anger. And I will be, like I'll admit, like that's how I respond. But my anger oftentimes does not look like the explosive anger. What my anger oftentimes looks like is passive aggressiveness. You know, as men, I think I've said this in some previous episodes, but there are levels to anger, but we don't like to necessarily call it that. We don't like to call it anger, because anger means like it's kind of gotten out of control. We often say things like, use other synonyms like frustration, or um, what's another? Frustration seems to be the biggest one. There's probably a few other synonyms out there that I'm
Yeah.
not thinking about at the moment, but anger seems to be, at least for myself, or passive aggressiveness, which is a form of anger, seems to be that's where I respond in fear. I tend to believe a distortion. I tend to have this belief in my head that something is going to go this way, or this is going to happen. And so rather than try and assert myself in any kind of healthy way and work through a particular issue, I'm going to be passive aggressive. And that comes out a lot in my marriage. And that can also come out in how I parent. Where I can freeze my wife out, I can freeze my kids out, because I genuinely believe that, again, this distortion is what's guiding me, that they're going to respond in a particular way if I put my emotions or I put my fears out there that are not going to be received. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I think that's how I respond.
Sure. I mean, I know there's times I've responded passive aggressively, but it's not, I personally hate passive aggressiveness, which makes me living in Seattle a weird place to live, because it's kind of the water you swim in here.
That's the love language here.
Exactly. I tend to be very direct, even when it's not super helpful. So, but mine tends to be the more classic, just explosive anger. I mean, in my conversation with Jenny and my wife last night, kind of had, I don't know if a little bit of revelation. I was kind of defending, like, I get angry because blah, blah, here's my reasons, um, and she was just kind of bringing it back to like, but that doesn't help. Like that escalates things. He's frustrated. Now you're yelling at him. That makes him scared and even more, frustrated. And, I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do? She's like, your voice gets quieter, gets lower. Like
Mm.
you calm him down, you don't escalate, you don't join him in the madness, um, I'm like, yeah, okay. Like, I don't really have anything to say to that. Like, you're right. And it's not something I don't like, admitting that I'm wrong or that she's right. But in 14 years of marriage, I've gotten better at turning that around quicker than I used to. I
It's
go
probably why
soak.
you've been.
I
It's probably
go
why you've been married 14 years, because you've
probably,
learned.
I go soak off and come back and be like, I'm sorry, you're right, I'm wrong. But yeah, it's yeah, that's
Yeah,
that
yeah.
tends to be my response is kind of more explosive anger.
No, I mean that's interesting. I assume that with as many fathers out there, you're going to get those varied responses. Not every dad's going to have like the explosive or even the passive aggressive. There's, probably other forms that are more aggressive, or even less passive.
Sure.
Um,
I'd
yeah, go
say
ahead.
that one that's kind of a classic, is, for maybe men who aren't as, whether it's anger or otherwise, as emotional as the shutdown. It's just like, I can't
Oh,
handle
sure,
this. I'm
yeah,
going to shut down. I'm going to go drink. I'm going to go to the garage, go to my man cave. I'm just not going to deal with it.
right.
That's neither of us, but I think that's pretty common as well.
And I would totally agree. That actually might be, just as common as the passive aggressiveness or even just the outright explosion of anger. That might even actually be more of the common response. I'd be kind of curious if there's data out there on that, but probably Pew Research would have that data if it does exist. But I think these are all forms of responses that fathers have to fear. Because there's obviously some kind of inadequacy that's driving, or some kind of distortion that the fear is rooted in. Oftentimes inadequacy on a number of issues, usually the way in which a father provides, be it financially, relationally, emotionally, and spiritually. Uh,
Sure. That's a huge stressor in our life. That's a root of so many arguments and stress and my irritability. Yeah.
right, right, and I think oftentimes the perspective is that fathers, husbands, men don't really know how to enter into these conversations. That it's oftentimes, the experts on these topics are, wives, are women, and they certainly do know a lot. But I think that drives our inadequacy as dads. That we feel inadequate. That like we're kind of stupid. We don't know necessarily how to enter into these conversations in eloquent and ways. We don't know how to enter into these conversations to express our fears in ways that we're going to be heard and advocated. And instead, what comes out is just anger. And so hopefully more men will have more conversations about this again in pubs and in bars over good whiskey, like we're doing. The last question that I want to ask before we kind of run out of time, and it's a big question. And I'll go ahead and answer it first. But what message does the Bible give fathers in general, but maybe even that can be specifically applied to dealing with fear in their lives? Now, I had to rely upon resources. I read an article last week, or last episode, it was, man's identity, and it was a CCF article. So I went back to CCEF and found another article. And this one was titled "Fear is Not Sin." But as I was going through it, I was able to mark down some scripture that I thought was important, that can be helpful for fathers when it comes to this issue of fear and parenting. And their promises and their commands that I think that it's important for fathers to be anchored in, to change the way that they respond to fear. And if they can do this, again, we're not trying to behaviorally mod things, but we are trying to change the overall narrative of fear, because fear is, again, rooted in a distortion, and we don't want that distortion reigning true in our minds. And so I have a couple of pieces of scripture. Genesis 28:15. I'm not going to go through and read them, but you can look them up. Genesis 28, chapter 28, verse 15. This is God's promise that He's going to be with us. And I think that's vastly important when we're fathers and we are thinking about fear, because fathers oftentimes from a biblical model are meant to be the spiritual heads of the household, and they're kind of in a lot of ways leading the way. Jesus is ultimately their head authority, and they're in submission to Christ. But sometimes being a dad is lonely. Being a dad is lonely, and you don't know if you're doing the right thing. And so having scripture like this, he promises that he's with us, and you see that as early as Genesis. Luke chapter 12, verse 22, God promises to provide for us, which is fantastic, because we're called to be providers, and we don't have a limitless supply of provisions. So it's really helpful to know where and who provides that. And so here God promises, Jesus promises that God provides for us. Luke chapter 17, verse 5, God, in response to fear, God commands us, kind of an encouraging command, to pray for an increase in faith, which I thought that's an interesting response to fear. And really that could be, a response to any other thing like anxiety, depression, anger. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 22, God commands us to pray for an increased ability to love one another. Again, like, these commands are all counterintuitive, and why would somebody pray in a fearful time, God, help increase my ability to love one another? Fear breeds more fear, and when we're focused on fear, that continues to breed more fear. But God calls us out of that fear to say, hey, let's love one another. And in being able to do that, that actually gives us a new heart, renews the heart that that Christ gave us when we were first saved, and gives us a new heart to continue to move forward, instead of in a spirit of fear, but in a spirit of love. So it's interesting, you get these two promises and you get these different commands, which I think are interesting ways and encouraging ways to, that fathers can respond to fear that is existing in their lives. But any thoughts on your end?
Seems like you kind of covered it all. I mean, when it comes to like practical response to fear, like for my son, I'm kind of boiling this down to him, by
sure.
reminding him that, like, of the truth. You got to remind yourself of God's truth. That's why we read the Bibles, because we forget very, very quickly. And so, like, when he's, at night, he's like, I'm afraid of the dark, or I'm lonely, whatever. It's like, well, you got to remember the truth. Like, God's always here with you. He cares about you. Mom and dad in the other room. There's nothing to be scared of, kind of like the gamut of truth. And then, well, did you pray? Like, God, will comfort you, and hear your prayers. And then, I have, and then we have, Samuel L. Jackson, read to him, go the, no, we don't. But
that'd be awesome if he did.
Yeah, most nights we don't get that frustrated, but yeah. And I mean, our kids need to hear this truth. We need to hear this truth, yeah.
Yeah. So, to all of our listeners out there, Christian and I, by no means, way, shape, or form, have fear tackled. I think both of us would readily admit that this is a daily fight, and this is a daily struggle. So honestly, this is two average dads that are simply saying, hey, this is what we struggle with, and this is what we enter into and what we share. Go for it, Christian.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, my hope is that this podcast is encouraging to the listeners, because I know I, for one, when dealing with inadequacies or fear, whatever, just life, I often feel like everything that I'm failing at, it's just one more thing. Oh, I'm not a good enough spiritual leader. Oh, I've got to work harder. Oh, now I'm neglecting my family. Oh, now I'm, upset with my kid. Like, just feels like there's always more, and I can't do enough, and just kind of piling, heaping shame and guilt and to-dos on top of stuff. And I don't think we're, portraying that, but we want to make sure this podcast is life-giving and encouraging, not like, hey, look at us, we have it together, like an Instagram version of a podcast. Sure. Of like, hey, this is all polished up and perfect, and you can never attain it. That's definitely not us.
Yeah, good word. I echo that, and I think that well, I hope anyways that what we're attempting to do any dads that are listening out there is edifying you and giving you more content to think about and ultimately direct you back to Christ, we're going to be ourselves as much as possible on this podcast. So drinking, occasional cuss word, F-bomb will happen. We're going to have bad days. We're going to have good days. But we're ultimately going to try as hard as we possibly can to point back to Christ and talk about the goodness of Christ and the truth of Christ and the gospel and all that is offered through the life, death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, and how that should be the place in which all dads seek to be transformed and understood, and the foundational piece to how they be married and parent. And you ain't going to be perfect at it, and you are going to mess up. And you know what? You're in good company. And we love you. And if you're a dad that is struggling, I would say reach out. We're happy to talk with you. And we're happy to listen and answer questions and be a resource. So, Christian, any parting thoughts before we wrap things up?
I got nothing. I don't want to taint your ending words there. So,
all right. Well, please do look for us on Instagram. We do have a Instagram page, the Old Fashioned Dad Podcast. Hopefully, content will be generated soon. We are working to get these episodes up. Thank you, Christian, for all the editing that you have been doing thus far. Please check out Preservation Distillery whiskey. Go read the review if you want, christianbringoffphotography.com. Next week, we hope to jump into guilt and fatherhood, and the whiskey is yet to be determined, but I promise it will be a delicious one. Till next time, I am Christian, and
I'm Christian.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
I like it.
The quarantine is getting me, bro. The quarantine's getting to me.
Don't quarantine me, bro. Hashtag.
Don't quarantine me, bro. Christian and Christian. Don't quarantine me, bro. Don't quarantine me.